Pokrovsk, the industrial fortress that held back some of the fiercest Russian offensives for over a year, is on the brink. Consistently one of the hotspots of the front line since last fall, when Russian forces approached the outskirts of the city, Pokrovsk has held out a lot longer than most expected. But once Russian forces started breaking into the city en masse, things started to fall apart much quicker. Now, as we record this video, despite Russian President Vladimir Putin's claim weeks ago that Pokrovsk was surrounded, and his invitations for journalists like me to come and visit to be sure, Russian forces have still not managed to finish taking the city. But having said that, there is no doubt that the Ukrainian pocket around the city of Pokrovsk is hanging by a thread, and it's no exaggeration to say that the situation is critical. A vibrant city which used to be a home for us journalists far in the rear on our frontline trips is now an apocalyptic wasteland infested with hundreds of Russian boots on the ground and countless drones in the air. So, how did we get here? What is going on the ground in Pokrovsk right now? How could this battle culminate? And what does it all mean for Russia's war against Ukraine? Today, I will tell you everything you need to know about this brutal final act of the Battle of Pokrovsk, from the heroic to the heartbreaking. In many ways, Pokrovsk tells us so much about where Russia's war has come over the last 2 years or so as a whole, and about where it could go next. So, pay attention. Our story starts in February 2024, when newly appointed Ukrainian Commander-in-Chief Alexander Syrsky ordered the last-minute withdrawal from another fortress, the city of Avdiivka outside occupied Donetsk. The war looked very different back then. Advances were incredibly slow and costly in either direction. Russia had major advantages both in manpower and artillery ammunition. Kyiv was making up for its shell hunger with innovations in drones, especially first-person view or FPV drones, which could take out a tank or hunt an individual soldier just as easily for just a few $100s. Ukraine was generally seen as having the advantage in the drone war, but Russia was learning and starting to catch up. With a long defensive war ahead, the hope was that after the fall of Avdiivka, Ukraine could retreat to well-prepared lines of defense and grind down Russian offensive plans for Donetsk Oblast into dust. Unfortunately, this didn't happen. Just a few months later, Russia managed to exploit a small tactical breakthrough just northwest of the city and develop it into a major offensive, pushing in the direction of Pokrovsk. Over 2024, with their foot on the gas pedal, Russian forces got closer and closer, with Ukrainian forces failing to consolidate or stabilize their defense. I remember the atmosphere in Pokrovsk back then. The city was still very much alive, but there was a sense that a storm was coming. Eventually, the fighting did reach the outskirts of Pokrovsk, but with the city well fortified, frontal attacks failed to make much further advances. Over winter, the situation stabilized across the front line, and Russian attempts to outflank Pokrovsk by the west were halted. In the harsh winter conditions, moving forward in Russia's trademark small infantry group assaults became much more difficult. Meanwhile, for Ukraine's drone teams, the vegetation, bare of leaves, made it much easier to spot and destroy any Russian soldiers moving through tree lines and forests before they reached Ukrainian lines. Remember this, it becomes important again later. With the arrival of spring, however, things started to pick up again. While probing assaults on Pokrovsk continued, Russia's main effort pushed to the northeast of the city, crossing the key highway connecting Pokrovsk to the nearby frontline hotspot of Kostiantynivka. By the time we visited at the end of June, Russian drones patrolled the skies above all the roads in and out of Pokrovsk, and rotating shifts became somewhat of a lottery. Things got worse for the Ukrainian defense in late July, when Russian forces reached the city of Rodinsk, cutting off the main supply road to Pokrovsk as well as its sister city, Mirnograd. Meanwhile, a Russian push made up of just a few dozen infantrymen broke into the southern outskirts of the city, an infiltration that took a major effort by Ukraine's assault forces and special forces to clear. As summer drew to a close and prospects of a peace deal drifted away, Pokrovsk continued to hold. Now, before we continue to the final act of this story, we need to stop and talk a little bit about tactics. As we have discussed and shown many times on this channel, the war of 2025 looks completely different on the ground, even to the war of 2024, let alone of 2022 when Russia launched its full-scale invasion. I talked about all this in a previous video back in April, which you can check out here, but let's refresh what we mean exactly. By 2025, both sides have developed a fully matured strike drone component in their force, which is now responsible for most enemy casualties on the battlefield. On the ground, that means a dense kill zone where anything as far back as 15 kilometers or more behind the contact line is in range of FPV drones, while within 5 or fewer kilometers, any movement at all can be spotted instantly and targeted in the space of minutes. This kill zone extends behind both the Ukrainian and the Russian front line, but it's not quite symmetrical. With its successful Baba Yaga-style drones, Ukraine holds a clear advantage in heavy bomber models, while Russian investment and scaling up into unjammable fiber optic drones has been devastating for Ukrainian logistics on the battlefield. On top of that, quantity and quality also matter. Being able to field more, better trained teams and keeping them well equipped with a regular supply of drones will give you an edge over the opponent. But for drone teams to be effective and focus on destroying the enemy, they must also be kept safe, well concealed and behind a stable front line, which brings us to the people who must hold that line. And here, unlike the drone war, which could be called close to a fair fight, the infantry equation between Russia and Ukraine is something else entirely. Fighting for years in brutal conditions and mostly without rotation, Ukrainian brigades, even the strongest ones, are critically under strength when it comes to infantry, often leaving gaping holes between frontline positions. Meanwhile, Russia, on the other hand, continues to enjoy a seemingly endless supply of new recruits, often sent straight into one-way assaults on Ukrainian lines just a few weeks after enlisting. These single-use infantrymen are mostly contract soldiers, tempted by huge sign-up bonuses to head off and participate in the invasion of their neighbor. Whether you call it human wave, meat assault, or sabotage infiltration tactics, the basic mission is the same: make your way through the Ukrainian kill zone, dig in, and move further, but under no circumstances turn around. And although Moscow's losses are often astronomical in the process, it sometimes works. Infiltrating between Ukrainian positions in an area like Pokrovsk, these small groups of Russian infantry can easily hide in the urban landscape and slowly creep forward. Once behind enemy lines, they are well placed to ambush Ukrainian drone teams working in the city, who are forced to pull back amid the chaos. This in turn stops these drone teams from doing the crucial work of surveilling and striking the front line, degrading the Ukrainian kill zone and allowing more Russian soldiers to make it through, and so on and so on. This is exactly what brought on the beginning of the end for Pokrovsk. On October the 20th, horrific footage emerged of 2 Ukrainian civilians shot dead by Russian troops near the city's railway station. In the days following, more and more footage emerged of Russian soldiers spotted deeper and deeper behind enemy lines. Lines that, on the ground, just simply didn't exist anymore. These images were often shared by Ukrainian units themselves, showing off their drone strikes on the enemy, but in doing so they helped map just how far the Russian assault groups had infiltrated. By October the 27th, Putin made his premature claim that the city was already surrounded. In reality, Pokrovsk wasn't encircled, it was simply being overrun, with the city area descending into chaotic urban fighting while the defense of the southern outskirts simply dissipated. Flashy Ukrainian counterattacks, including the planting of the state flag in the city center and the dramatic landing of special forces by Black Hawk helicopter, were never going to be enough to actually clear the city. This doesn't mean that the city center is completely under Russian control, despite the images of the Mad Max-style convoy entering Pokrovsk from the south. Instead, the urban area has fallen into a gray zone where Ukrainian and Russian positions overlap and the idea itself of an actual front line disintegrates. Meanwhile, the threat of encirclement of a large area is now present, just not for Pokrovsk, but for neighboring Mirnograd. Here, hardened Ukrainian brigades, including Marines, paratroopers, and the 68th Jaeger Brigade that we embedded with over summer, are still holding their sectors strong, despite unbelievably tough conditions and virtually non-existent logistics. By early November, the distance between the two Russian pincers around Mirnohrad was tightened to under 5 kilometers. On the map, it looks a lot like Ukraine's defense of cities like Bakhmut and Avdiivka, where, despite being almost completely surrounded, Ukraine held the flanks of both cities, allowing for a last-minute withdrawal. But Pokrovsk is not Bakhmut or Avdiivka. In this new drone-dominated reality, it's far more dire. In these conditions, as Ukrainian commanders fighting there told me, practically no logistics or rotation is possible by vehicle due to the suffocating Russian drone threat. Instead, everything is done on foot and by drone, through a kill zone that encroaches from both sides. At the time of recording, both sides are throwing extra forces into the Pokrovsk area as the battle takes on serious political significance. For Moscow, beyond finally capturing the fortress city itself, achieving a true operational encirclement, the first since the Battle of Mariupol, would be a huge propaganda victory. So, with the threat of disaster so high, why is Kyiv still refusing to withdraw? Well, this is not new. Known for often prioritizing a political narrative over strategic sense, the Ukrainian command, with Syrskyi at the top, is notorious for its so-called no-step-back policy, where commanders simply never get the order to withdraw, and if they do lose positions, they are ordered to retake them, whether or not they have the forces for it. In near encirclements like Pokrovsk, that means fighting in unfavorable attritional conditions, leading to excess losses that then damage the unit's ability to hold the line in favorable ones. The final chapter of the Battle of Pokrovsk is still yet to be written, and much of how it plays out will depend both on Kyiv's decision-making and the heroism of Ukrainian soldiers fighting on the ground. But looking beyond Pokrovsk, what does the imminent fall of the city mean for the defense of Donbass and the war as a whole? Here, it's important to recognize that Pokrovsk has done its job, holding back Russian offensive operations in Donetsk Oblast for over a year and grinding up huge amounts of enemy manpower and equipment. According to Kyiv, and yes, these figures should be taken with a big grain of salt, Russian total casualties in the Pokrovsk area reached 25,000 for the month of October alone. Despite Putin's best efforts to prove otherwise, Russia is still far from taking the rest of Donetsk Oblast. Without a sudden Ukrainian collapse, it could take years and hundreds of thousands more casualties. For Kyiv, the challenge will be to reorganize and stabilize its defense behind Pokrovsk to prevent Russia making new breakthroughs. This will be made easier by winter conditions, but also harder by the relentless Russian pressure on the ground and in the air. The Battle of Pokrovsk has bought Ukraine precious time at a critical moment when support for Kyiv from its most powerful international partner, the United States, has disintegrated. With that in mind, however this story ends, the Ukrainian soldiers' heroic efforts to endure for so long will be remembered for centuries, even if nothing like the life that Pokrovsk once knew ever returns to its ruined streets. If you are observing this war simply to cheer for either side, this video might not leave you very satisfied. Here at the Kyiv Independent, our existence, our homes, and the lives of our friends on the front line depend on Ukraine's ability to stay in this fight. But to achieve this, whether we're talking about the leadership here, Ukraine's foreign partners, or anyone invested in the importance of this cause, we believe that maintaining close contact with the truth is paramount. We can do this not only because we regularly travel to the front lines and speak with top commanders, but also because we are truly independent, not relying on government funding, foreign grants, or billionaires to do our work. If you value what we do, please consider becoming a member of the Kyiv Independent community at the link below. For you, it's the price of a cup of coffee. For us, it makes all the difference. Thank you.